we are starting up. Now let's get our light bulb going, our clickety-clack, our analog devices. Welcome to Evolution Hour on today, the 6th of October, 2025, in our ongoing year of doom. And don't forget, tortucanwordpress.com. All those cute little Troubles in Paradise things are available freebie PDFs. Now, yipes, a lot of the text like 20 years old, but I think it holds up really quite well, all things considered. We have learned a lot in the many years since as to formatting text and structuring things. One can even see the evolution from Evolution Slam Dunk structure to Rocks Were There Volume 1, and we're learning things for Rocks Were There Volume 2. It's been a long day. And our little computer is doing little updatey things and so forth and so on. Weather has gotten a little cooler. I'm out of short sleeve shirts. We're now into, a comfy 72 degrees here. I suppose it'd be 20 something Celsius. At any rate, we are proceeding accordingly. Hello. Okay, Lisa, you can catch the show afterwards, and be sure to leave comments, etc., so on and so forth. Anyway, for the continuing cast, we are concluding chapter 13, unlucky chapter 13 of Sarfati and Tay's Titans. Next chapter is going to be Did Dinosaurs Live After the Flood, which is skitter-scattering around some of the stuff for living dinosaurs. They're fairly circumspect on it, as I recall, but we'll be getting into the exact details. Anyway, we're finishing off the exciting world of... but the 14th, think I can get a present? Not sure what present I could supply under the circumstances. Any present I would like would involve quite a few people in the Trump administration bursting into flames or something like that. Hello, Vesta. Anyway, this is, of course, also a Luskin week, so we've got a couple bits on our ongoing work through the biggest yawner of all times, the 800-plus papers that the Luskin Discovery Institute gang waved as though it were supporting their position on junk DNA. It's basically reinforcing the material we've already dealt with. But anyway, back to Sarfati and Tay. As I alluded to in previous episodes, there's been a lot of misrepresentation in the creationist literature on soft tissue, this soft tissue issue. And the last episode, we pointed out there were some things that have actually been reinforced in the creationist literature where they're repeating the same tropes over and over again. Well, we get it again as they conclude the chapter, because there's a couple pieces, a 2002 commentary piece by Nielsen Marsh, which I'll be putting a link up to for full text in due course, showing that to Sarfati and Tay are showing DNA breaks down very rapidly. When that paper was alluding to the fact that millions of years could be involved in some of these preservations. So that was not a strange term for very rapidly. Then the other paper is Alan Toft et al. 2012. That's a fairly major detailed analysis on decay times of various components, including DNA. And what kind of length of fragments, maybe 100 nucleotides long, which is a bliplet that's smaller than an ALU. Anyway, Sarfati and Tay kind of report that in a chart. I'll give you a vision. It's one of the last ones of their chapter. There we go. We'll see if we can to speed there. This chart here, relatively sparse, and it's all functionally based on Alan Toft, which they didn't actually get around to citing until the very end. Even within their frame, Alan Toft are clearly talking about things that are lasting 10,000 years or more, and into the millions if we're only talking about a few nucleotides. Sarfati and Tay don't particularly like that prospect. Remember, 6,000 years. Waving a smatter of two or three creationists to dispute things for them. of which the most detailed would be a 2014 thing from Brian Thomas and Jeffrey Tompkins in creation.com, which we'll be putting the link up to so you can be amused by it. I got to go through to find out how much of the source material in it is actually fresh or not. This time for October 7. Yes. Oh, the failed rapture. Yes. As a charter member of the Apocalypse of the Month Club, it's kind of fun to watch the periodic, every like 5 or 6 years, 10 at the outside, somebody somewhere is going to have the revelation from the Most High and do the Millerite mistake of being really specific on the end times. And then, as we can see, as people have commented on, a smattering of people around the earth, and particularly people that are living entirely on social media and secondary parasitism, are taking that seriously, at least for a while. I understand the guy who's a preacher from down in South Africa is already doing the Millerite thing of maybe he's recalculating his revelation to move it downstream, which is exactly what Miller did back in the 1840s, and did that several times. You know, he moved the date and then they moved it again. But by the time you get down to the third time and it hasn't happened, that's when you started having quite a few people who were giving up on it and not necessarily improving how they think, because the big block of the Millerites ended up forming the cohort that generated the Seventh-day Adventists. So, which bred ultimately the young earth creationist angle that would bring in George McCready Price and all of that stuff in the 1920s. So that's a time frame, therefore, that's some 3 generations long betwixt the failed prophecy thing and the development of the Millerite or the Seventh-day Adventist young earth creationism, and then another 3 generations sliding on into our period with the activities of Ken Ham and Kent Hovind and young earth creationist up and down the yin yang. Apparently, God uses a Roman calendar, even though they supposedly use the Feast of Trumpets based on the Jewish calendar. Yes, yes. Well, or they are Most High. They make a new rapture prediction. People should not do drugs. Yeah. It's possible that some of the people who come up with rapture notions are on something, but the vast majority are just dithering around with the Bible, and they have minds that can do that. An exemplar here, classic case, is, of course, the late great planet Earth from the 1960s. And that guy's still dangling around, gray-haired. I think I 700 Club recently. But he was noting things. This is like, remember, late 1960s. The trope then was that the second coming would be taking place 40 years after the formation of Israel, which means 1988, which sounds a long way off if you're in 1969, but is a long time ago from 2025. So you can literally see the behavior of these various people over long time frames, presumably exactly the same phenomenon that was happening for any apocalyptics that were going on 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, or whatever, and there have been a continuous bunch. Typically, end times belief tends to become more intense in very stressful periods. Happened during the 30 Years' War or big plagues, things like that. So when people feel destabilized, they feel uncertain about their future and their economic environment and war and tumult and all of that, it's likely to increase to a high level. This, I don't know that this South African guy really qualifies as much of a blip, because it's kind of like the little brief fashion of, popping Tide Pods that was going on a few years back. These things, boop, boop, in and out fast. In our modern, exciting internet era. Isn't that? Yes, that's the Left Behind. God, I'm trying to remember. Hal Lindsey, I think. And he, I think, is still alive. Said he was gray-haired old man, even grayer than moi, and still pouring through the newspapers, seeing the signs of any minute now. And this is like 2012, 2015. This is decades after the world was supposed to have had the second coming tribulation back in the 1980s, 90s. So the ability of the brain to move the goalposts and forget that they used to have goalposts somewhere else that they were really certain of is one of the properties that you find in this sort of mind. And we can therefore extrapolate and assume that at least some of the people that were founding Christianity, and you could counterpart that for almost any other religion that you like to have minds exactly like Hallinzy, that they see the things they want to see, they're certain of the things they're certain of, and when they have to retool because reality isn't fitting, they can maneuver around, and they don't really give up the core belief system or their bad methodology, which gives them kind of an infinite elasticity when it comes to this sort of thing. This I think is the most consistent thing. Yeah, the Left Behind and the approach to stuff then goes through Tim LaHaye, and ultimately in those little movies that Kirk Cameron was in, and they made a bunch of them, I think 4, 5, 6 of them, of middling quality all along the way. LaHaye, of course, was knee-deep in the formation of the original creationist movement back in the 1960s. So there's a lot of cross-connections in that going on. Now, we're generations down the road, and it would be swell if one of these days some reporters would actually start quizzing people on it. But given that apparently Speaker Johnson is a young earth creationist, Ken Hambrand, now you're seeing in political contexts exactly the same kind of methodology that they apply to the rest of the universe in their creationist mythology. For example, just recently over the government shutdown, where the Republicans are insisting that the Democrats want to give that they're holding the Republicans hostage on this shutdown thing because they want illegal immigrants to get free health care, which is not true. It's in no way true. George Stephanopoulos tried to pin him down on this in a recent interview, and he was just wiffle waffling and jumping. It's in the deer in the headlight mode that's very characteristic of Tortukans. Not surprising. It's exasperating and pathetic, but not surprising. So that's one of the reasons why I've been insisting that Tortukans should never be in political office or on the Supreme Court or whatever, because they can't be held to be reliable. They may map accurately onto some things, but it's accidental because they can veer off the map in any other ways. So should we be surprised that somebody like Johnson, who was accepting the 2020 election fraud claims of Donald Trump, would then, and was lawyer to the Ark Encounter, would apply this same bad method of dogma first, facts when convenient, and when they're not convenient, you just bluff them away and change the subject to something else. It's no way to conduct governance. So we're in an interesting little time, and we're in this period now as we're starting to move into the autumn, when my little stock market crash, economic collapse counter is starting to wiggle along. The stock market's at record highs, which could also be said of 1929. And we'll be seeing what will be the longer term impact of the tariffs and the ICE raids driving workers in the construction industry and migrant workers picking up crops. I've already spotted some curious empty shelves on some commodities, that sugar and things that often use that, like Pepsi Cola and others that seem to have been scarfed up. If it's possibly because people are stocking up just in case there's shortages or just in case prices go up. That was the thing that drove the old stagflation back in the 1970s. It drove a certain degree of economic activity simply because you might as well buy it now because it's only going to get more expensive later on. So that, of course, was not in a position of depression. That was just in a period of anemic economic growth. The Millerites were around 1840. And this was right around the same period that the spiritualist movement was getting off the ground. It was a busy time, tumultuous time. Of course, the United States was undergoing tremendous growth, and migrants were coming in. You had Irish Catholics coming into the Boston area. You had the simmering mess of slavery that they kept punting things down the road with the Compromise of 1820, and then farther on, and of course the Dred Scott decision in the 1850s. At least Justice Taney and the Dred Scott decision now can be punted downstream as one of the worst decisions in the history of the Republic, or one of the worst Supreme Court matters, because now we have the Roberts Court, where we have not just Roberts on his own, but all of the other Trumpistas circulating around them on their little dockets that are racking up some of the worst decisions ever, and the most corrupt and oblivious, air quotes, originalist Supreme Court. Now, it's their reputation is never going to be recovered, and just like the United States' reputation on the world stage is never going to recover, because they could, foreign countries and potential allies could accept Trump 1.0 as a weird aberration. Trump 2.0 is a pattern that suggests that there's way too much screwball about the American electorate to rely on us for much. So we'll see how that works out in the long term. The economy stuff. Yes, there was the 19th century had four big depressions, two of them under Democrats because there was no Republican Party in those days, and then another two under Republicans that were almost like clockwork every 25 years. The first one triggered off when Jackson got rid of the Bank of the United States, which was performing a lot of the role that a central bank would be doing in the Federal Reserve System. And that's one of the reasons why it was created, because of these recurring economic depressions that kept popping up. The second one was from a railroad failure. I seem to think it was the Erie Railroad. The 1870s was definitely from a railroad. It figures in Paralogs 2, under the Southern Double Cross, where it has all sorts of fun little ramifications about things, that came when the Northern Pacific Railroad collapsed. And it's pulled the House of Cook in Britain, financed the Civil War, that pulled them down with it, showed how precarious they could be. In fact, the 1870s depression lasted longer in Britain than it did in the United States. It lingered all the way into the mid-1880s. So that's exciting. And then, of course, the final one of the 19th century was when Benjamin Harrison, another Republican, a Republican that got elected without winning the popular vote. He squeaked in through the Electoral College. That's how. Pro-tariff, inflationary silver policy. I mean, all the worst policies you could imagine. And because there were no safety net or anything in the government to be able to forestall stuff and ameliorate mess, managed to trigger a depression in one term, where the stock market crash fell apart in early 1893, just as Grover Cleveland was coming in for a second term. By the way, weirdly coincidental again, there was a Venezuelan crisis under Cleveland, and of course our God King Emperor and Hegseth, the crazy War Department guy, or Steve Miller. There's some indication that a lot of these raids where they're bombing alleged drug smugglers, which we've seen no evidence that any of that's actually true, are going after ones out of Venezuela. So what comes around goes around in a weird way. And those of us familiar with history find things strange. At any rate, back to the matter at hand. So we've got the other paper, Altoft, which is quite a major paper from 2012. And the Tompkins material that you can compare a lot of that stuff. I need to go through. Whenever I get a technical paper and not been aware of this Thomas and Tompkins thing previously, that I go through papers sometimes immediately and sometimes on a stack of things which I'll be processing eventually, keeping track of all the technical literature they cite. And in some cases, particularly a lot of repetitious cases, they're not necessarily adding much in the way of new technical material. There's stuff that's being retread over and over again. But every once in a while, there's a source that actually hasn't been included in my data field, and I add that in. So that's why I have a measurement in my master spreadsheet where I'm functionally measuring the range of how much of the technical literature the creationists as a block have actually bumped into. And it's running about 20% of the technical work that I have in my data field. And since they're misrepresenting a big chunk of that, and my data field is not the whole data field, it's a floor, it's a reasonable summary to say that the creationist community is missing 90% of the data field. So there, you can quote me on that one. At any rate, the that technical literature stuff, it gets a little bit bigger each time because creationists love riffing off of current literature. But overall, that proportion stays relatively the same. And eventually, as years go by, and even if I'm working on other projects, yes, I follow my, yes, well, I have to say it's important to remember that the 77 million people that voted for Trump are not the majority of Americans. It shows you the dangers of when big chunks, 100 million or more potential voters, weren't voting at all. And a big chunk, 5 or more million, that voted for Biden in 2020 apparently sat on their hands and wouldn't vote for Harris in 2020. So she actually got like 75 million votes and Trump around 77 million. So he actually squeaked in with only about a 2 million vote margin, which would easily have changed had more people voted, although whether that would have translated into an electoral victory or not, just a repeat of 2016, it would depend on which states were doing what. But so you have one factor is a lack of voter participation, so that a lot of people feel disaffected and they just think nothing matters because however they vote, they don't get what they want if they have figured out what they want. But they're about to get something they may not want at all. And it's not only the rest of us that are going to have to be paying the price on this, it's also the Trumpistas themselves. And underlying this then is that recurring theme that talking about underlying method that is the problem. And so people who are decent and good family people and kind to their neighbors and all the rest, nonetheless, if they have the sort of mind that is easily addicted to very insular technical secondary sources, so much of the information that would be relevant on so many of these issues aren't being presented. For example, the shooter at the Mormon Church in Michigan, I think it was, Fox Trump Pravda conveniently left out any allusion to the fact that he was a right-wing Trump supporter. So apparently he was. And so they just kind of home in on the little parts they want to deal with. Well, if you're just watching Fox News, you therefore are not getting a full picture. You're getting a parsed picture, which is exactly the kind of thing that I've been documenting here that creationists are presenting. Hello, purple. And that source methods is biting us in the ass. So the tough road to hoe, which involves at the educational level, it involves at the social level, to where people need to be consciously asking for sources and able to evaluate whether or not the sources are reliable or not. And it's not rockets. It's exactly the same methodology that I was trained in back in the day, 50 in college, about how you evaluate source material, because a source can be biased, it can be dogmatic. And how do you evaluate that? By cross-comparing, by looking for data field to try to find out whether you can pin things down to where information is being left out, where in my field of history, where historians would lose the ground is because they're not paying attention to all the data field. And new people are coming along bringing up additional sources. Well, if you have too many of the electorate who just don't know how to do that or realize they need to do that, and they're just letting the sound bites fill their brain with the things they would like to be true, and they're not getting any other information or deflect it if they hear contrary information, well, this is what we're getting. We're getting the most incompetent nincompoop president in history, who is spiraling down the drain. Good Lord, he wants to go back to battleships in that deranged diatribe that he was giving with Hegseth for all those generals that they had pulled in. Boy, there's an uncomfortable moment in military history. And Trump is going on about gold trim on the certs he wants to give out and the need that we go back to battleships. Well, there's a reason why nobody builds battleships in the 21st century. Matter of fact, nobody was building battleships by the late 20th century because they're not a good idea. And so all his brain that's cycling back literally to the 1970s, I think, can think about is that, for example, the New Jersey was rolled out of mothballs for a while to be acting as a floating gun platform for Vietnam. And did that win Vietnam War for us? Nope. So this is just insane. And if you have a person of that caliber of literal dementia spiraling down the tube, and then you have a group of enablers who are constantly reinforcing him by presenting happy news and happy polls and the like, to where in his brain, like Hitler in the Führer bunker, he still thinks the imaginary divisions are still there. This is bad news for everybody. Yes, morons are governing America. I can do my point. Don't blame me. I voted for Harris. I'm not part of this iniquity. But 100% of the Trump voters fall into that thing. Well, back on to our Luskin list. We got two more installments, both from 2019. Quinones Valdez et al., which have the characters of the ALU retrotransposons popping up just peripherally, insofar as the regulators of this A-to-I editing system could latch on to ALUs. This was just the observational matrix in there, and which is nothing surprising, nothing shocking from our point of view. Rochad Yahuri and Abizov, 2019, are suggesting something really more interesting yet. Quote, old ALU expansion had a stabilizing role on the human genome, unquote, which altogether reminds us that there's no indication in either one of these papers that most retrotransposons do anything, only that they can come to be interacting with existing biological systems, and that, like a iceberg, a very frequent iceberg sitting in the genome, that they've come about to act as an anchorage system for the existing systems. This is material we've encountered in previous papers. Hello, Brian. Need to reinstate the fairness doctrine real bad. There's a lot of things we need to do. And unfortunately, so long as Idiot Carr is in charge of the FCC and the ideological nutballs are running the show, don't hold your breath on that one. It's going to be a tough row to hoe, but if we have an economic collapse and it's up to the citizenry who have their brains still in gear for the blue states to be surviving and prospering and holding the line, or suffering less than the ignoramus red states, so that there is a glaring example between the two. In some respects, had Trump lost in 2024, you'd still have millions of grievance-wielding MAGA people fuming, oh, things would be so much better if only the God King Emperor were president of the United States. Well, like Clarence in It's a Wonderful Life, oh, you get your wish. Now you get to see. So we get to be in Pottersville. We have to survive Pottersville for the next few years, and then figure out how to recreate Bedford Falls, or a new improved Bedford Falls with an even better safety net for Bailey Savings and Loan, as a consequence of seeing just how screwed up the Trumpistas can do everything. Anchorage systems, so they only work in Alaska. Oh, ho, purple. Oh, yummy, yum. Yes. Yes. As we know, Anchorage, Alaska, has played a pivotal role in the evolution of ALU retrotransposons, especially in mongooses. Try that one on for size. Anyway, so both of this is repeating the issue that together, neither one of these papers have done anything at all to suggest that we're not dealing with a completely natural process that is churning along, producing the variations that we're seeing. Because remember, the end game in this monotonous biweekly operation is to test out the belief that Casey Luskin and their gang were presenting, that most, as in above 50%, probably 80%, boy, they'd love it to be 100, of junk DNA is actually intentional and doing things. And that has not proven to be the case. Remember, since you've got millions and millions and millions of these little things littering our genome, that you can have a tiny proportion of them, 10%, and that still is a lot of things doing stuff. You can have tens or hundreds of thousands of points where things are happening when that's still a tiny proportion of the whole. And the vast majority of them are still just self-replicating deadweight that can bump into the genome in some spot or other, or not, as the case may be. So far, we have absolutely no evidence of this, and we don't have to take my word for it because I've been presenting every paper full text in almost all cases, so everybody can look all for themselves and see what the circumstances is, which, by the way, is more than can be said for that mess. I'm organizing everything on my spreadsheet that I analyze it in alphabetical order, first off, and then another listing that lists off by category, because they've got like about 10 or 12 different categories. Almost all of the ones that we've been dealing with so far are on their first category that's mainly ALUs. Then there is a chronological listing to see. Most of them are relatively recent, 2020s on, but there are occasional suspiciously old, weird little pieces that have popped up, which we've alluded to in previous episodes. But it's a long list, supposedly 800 or more, but exactly how many? I don't know. We'll see. We've encountered at least one example of duplication where the same paper is showing up more than once. I suspect that's probably not going to happen all that frequently. So eventually we'll know exactly how many there are. And when we're done with it, we'll be able to say with confidence whether or not there's any indication of any of those that the primary issue, which is how much of this stuff, junk DNA, is actually functional, has changed or contradicts in any way the position that Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock and the like have elucidated from their point of view. So very, very thing. Are retrotransposons part of the non-coding DNA? Ah, yes, indeed they are. They can get inveigled, and in most cases, they don't seem to ever pop up much to make proteins, although there are a few examples, I think, knocking around in there. But most of the time, they're getting stuck and connected up to the regulation system. So the regulation system often, if it needs to have like hotspots to be paying attention to, well, boy, ALUs are a handy little representing on that because it's a place where there's a lot of ALUs. So there seems to be like safety in numbers. The presence of a lot of ALUs seems to act as focal points for an awful lot of regulation things. Often the regulation is turn it off. Make sure that the ALUs aren't doing anything. And in rare instances, yeah, we'll let them do a little bit here. Let's see what's going on. So there's a huge variety. When you've got tens of thousands of different examples of this stuff going on, you're going to have all different permutations of all of this stuff, which should hardly surprise you. But it's all part of the stuff that's not per se protein coding material, of which that's only a small proportion. And in fact, most of the evolutionary dynamics, I would contend, is not from having new proteins so much as having modified regulation of existing systems or occasionally tweaking of existing proteins. So that's how you get like new venom material and little things that can process particular molecules in specialized ways. On a very rudimentary level, it's how citrate processing could modify in a slimmed down E. coli that's part of the long-term evolution experiments of Lensky. That is an analog of the kinds of things that we're seeing along the road. So that junk DNA stuff includes as a rubric an awful lot of the non-coding DNA. But more properly, that level of really junk DNA is stuff that's not even directly involved in regulatory systems or other factors. It's just foam on the beer. Some of it can be pseudogenes, formerly active, and they've just gotten duplicated and then turned off, and they're floating around. And there's varying amounts of this stuff. Generally speaking, Bacteria don't have that kind of thing because their system is a ring form of DNA rather than that long spool. And so those spools that get tightened around and can cross connect, and then they're often much longer DNA. That gives much more opportunity for all of this little weird filigree crap. Just think of the average DNA molecule as like Donald Trump's gold filigreed reception room, where there's just lots and lots and lots of little blunk blah, 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 and bling bling blung blung things all over the place. And once in a while, some of them are actually of interest to look at, or go, oh, that's kind of interesting, let's use that. But most of the time, we're just going, oh, okay, well, more of the same. So I hope that explains a little bit on the retrotransposons part. So much of this stuff wouldn't even have been a thing if I had taken a lot of biology back in high school or even in college, which we're talking 60s and 70s, because so much of this information has come along since then. So in some respects, it was kind of nice that as I was starting to really get involved in studying the anti-evolution thing, I was coming into it in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when a lot of this revolution was taking place, and now we were getting a whole new things on the basement floor. And so I started following that ALU retrotransposon thing back when they were thought to have like maybe 400,000 of them in the human genome. Now it's more like 1.4 million and counting. So every generation there's a little bit more of them because they have copy code. How big of that can happen is anybody's guess. We'll see all that. So I should be thanking our patrons, who are people who have stuck it out through thin and thick. I thank everybody who has been continuing to help out. It makes a difference, as well as my occasional book royalties from the 4 books. And hopefully by the time next year is out, we will have 2 more to contend with. So our thank you to the colleagues and researchers, assistant researchers, friends, and all of our various legacy patrons. And I apologize for that weird sudden change from the blue, because something weird goes on with my freebie version of Word in this little laptop. But things are puzzling. I came out a little bit late today because the computer was doing its little update, and when it got all updated, it was saying, oh, would you like to buy Microsoft 365? And I'm going, nope, we do not have the finances for that. And so I don't really do any writing or anything on my laptop. This is basically the platform for doing the show, because it's got the cute little camera and so forth, and completely portable, which is why we can go the show on the road in Seattle and all the rest. I learned in the same era. Yeah, and so I'm sure you found the same experience that I had. That, boy, especially from the high school era, holy smokes, had I taken a biology class in 1968 high school, you'd be talking about books that would maybe barely be bringing in information from the early 1960s because of the time lag it takes to do school textbooks and whether or not they're recent or not. So that would be basically material that had kind of a edited, coalesced version of the Darwinian synthesis of the 1930s, 40s period. But a revolution was about ready to hit. So coming at it decades later was really much handier, because now we're into these things. Homeobox genes were only just starting to come onto the map in the 80s and 90s, and they've had a revolution in our conception of the structure of organisms and how phyla are originating through a superstructure of core homeobox genes and all that stuff. Look at how to activate God mode in Win. It's not that hard to take over. Yeah. Start 1978. So you're about a decade after Old Fart here. And to some extent, what's been going on at the high school level, I don't know. But I can kind of catch up around the corner because my co-author on Rocks Were There is way younger than I am. So he's in his 20s and therefore at the college level. So he is hitting that primary source core science data field in the same counterpart of what I was doing when I was just hitting college 50 years earlier. So he's getting an interaction of that level. And of course, then you've got still young very on the ball scientists like Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock, who are articulate and know their fields, and they can deal with this at far more sophisticated level than mere moi, who has to read the science papers from afar. I was in the Marine Corps in '78. Yeah. That's I was out of college by that period and slunking around, bouncing from one little side job to another. To some extent, I'm in my happy mode currently in air quotes retirement because A, I'm probably more busy creatively than I've ever been in my life, and B, the tools are here to do things that would have been impossible prior to that. So all of the books would have been impossible to have done. I wouldn't have had access to the technical literature I needed. It's way beyond just the feasibility of interacting on the internet. It's the sheer sophistication of material, the range of older sources that are being digitized gradually, so much more of the technical literature and older works and 19th century apologetic books, and it's just mind-boggling the array of material that have come and available at archive.org and various other venues, or specialized dedicated websites like the people that have like the Darwin letters and various other ones, and you have their counterparts with C.S. Lewis and everything else, to where you have a range of primary source material that can be accessed at speed in a way that would have just been exhausting or impossible back when you would have to go to physical libraries and try to track material down and wander through stacks of magazine back issues and go things manually, one thing out. It was very slow. Plus, then if you wanted to preserve something, you'd have to go and make a photocopy of the article. That would be the case I would have to do with like Nature articles. So it's a very different time, which means that, University 74. So we're all cycling around in that Ford, Nixon, Ford, early Reagan years environment, because he was coming in the 1980s. That from a scholar's point of view, I'm a happy camper. Both the paralogs novels and the material for the science books are accessible in ways that, wow, just astonishing. In the same way, there's a friend that's also helping me on a Politique war game, who we're coming along beautifully on that little puppy as well. The joys of 3D printing. But he is also doing a science fiction story that I've been giving him pointers and things on. And he too has just had spectacular access to an array of primary source material when he wants to find out about the studying. His story involves all real characters rather than any fictional ones. And so finding their voices, their interviews and biographies that they have been done about them, or autobiographies, memoirs, it's just amazing the amount of material that's there. So anybody that's diligent and persistent has just a cornucopia of accessibility in a way that's just unprecedented, which means nobody has an excuse for being stupid and ignorant, not in 2025. If you believe things that are patently not true, it's because either you are just not relying on reliable sources and never fact-checking them, or just unable to tiptoe out of the little bunker and start examining things directly. So this will be an interesting measure to find out who's capable of doing that. There's an awful lot of people that have been doing YouTubes and things who, unlike moi, were raised in conservative creationist households and the like. And they are the sorts that when they get out in the bigger world and start getting access to information, they go, wow, I didn't hear about this. And they go through crises of faith in some cases, but certainly change their attitudes on things. And quite a few of them have independently stumbled onto that source methods approach to analysis, which is not merely to find out what the facts are, but to delve into how come, or the views you used to have, how come you believe that? What did you rely on? What did you not know about? How did you avoid knowing about it? And why was it left out of the apologetics? All of that pops up when you start analyzing source methods. And it's a thing that now, because we have, at least for the time being, unless authoritarian governments start trying to restrict things in the way the PRC and authoritarian governments do, we can run with things. Oh, notifier went off. James is live. Yes, Brian, thank you for popping up on here. I have no qualms about the fact that of watching a show not live. It is absolutely delightful having everybody in the live chat because every once in a while we'll have this little spark of questions and we can go off on digressions and all that kind of stuff, which is just absolutely delightful. At the same time, when I'm often typically catching a lot of shows after it's already showed. That's the case with Dapper Dino. It's the case with my co-writer Jackson because of all the neat little science material. Erica, Gutsick Gibbon. There's so many of these that from my end, I often prefer not to watch live because then they're a finished thing. They've already put their links in so that I can follow up on that. I can stop the video at any point where I'm bumping into technical literature that they're bringing up. I do that with Dave Farina and other people that they may or may not have full links to the things, but they're alluding to stuff and they're showing what the papers are up on the screen. And that requires stopping the show, putting the material down, getting it coordinated, tracking the material down, boop, resuming show, and so forth and so on. Or encountering things, where people are saying just delicious claptrap of the creationist, where sometimes you want to actually have a full transcript of the claptrap. We will be having examples in the new book of things that we have just had to take down verbatim because you just can't make this up. That let them have their own. In Miss 98 or something live. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. I love interacting on stuff. It's the matter of when you can ask a direct question in a nice seminar format and get a real-time response on it, I think is really quite useful. So at the very least, I do try to keep my eyeball and like it on when the chat is showing up so I can keep an eye on things. And if people are bringing up topics or wondering about things like retrotransposons, I can at least try my best to try to give a response and a comment on the thing and make it as interesting as possible. So there we go. That is it. So anyway, this is episode the 37th installment of the Luskin things. We're about 140 or so papers into their list, so there's a long way to go. But I've got so much other material on the plates and working on the books. I just been finishing up the material on the Lost Squadron trope that pops up in creationist lore about the World War II airplanes that crashed in Greenland and that got eventually buried down under hundreds of feet of ice, and that this supposedly disproves the whole notion of dating ice cores, which it doesn't. And that's a little sidebar that's going into a trope. And then now we then be moving on to the stuff on asteroids and meteors and lunar dust stuff and some little bit of sidebars on origin of life material and the whole notion of exoplanets and all of that kind of stuff to act as that part. And once that's all dusted up, then I can move on to putting in my whale material and the Grand Canyon paleocontinent stuff into the chapter that the most recent one that Jackson has done, and then turn my tail as well to working on the Ark Encounter list, which I really am proud of the idea that we're going to be really the first off the mark to have a complete breakdown of that Ark Encounter kind list, which is relevant, extremely so, because it's the shortest smallest number of kinds of anything. There's been a gradual evolution into the creationist lexicon from like tens and 20,000s kinds. That's kind of the John Woodmarapp feasibility study era, 1996 book period. And then you have that drop off the cliff to only that like 1,500-ish kinds that are on board the Ark, and they're listed explicitly. Not easy to find because they're stupid lists. They've never put it up as a list, let alone document how they arrived at each of the items. But basically, it's the families, animal families, which is okay. That's consistent with the lore and the structure of modern baraminology, but it means they have to be selectively deviant on that when it comes to how do they deal with all the people in the primate family that includes us? Well, we have to be a separate kind. And then the other issue, the real big did giveaway, which I, as an anal retentive scholar, immediately spotted that the kinds are not in alphabetical order. Why aren't they in alphabetical order? It's bad enough that they're grouped by mammals and reptiles and birds and all of that, which are not themselves kinds, but there's a whole bunch of actual kinds within that framework. But why aren't they alphabetical? There's no kind related to any other kind. They're separate kinds. Why then are they in a non-alphabetical order? Well, it's because they're riffing off of evolutionary systematics. They're just, in the case of the mammals, they're just plowing down through the technical papers that are doing standard systematics, and they're putting them in the order that they're listed in the cladograms in the evolutionary literature. That's why they're not in alphabetical order. So the parasitism is just plain as day as soon as you start looking at why they're in the order that they are. We'll be having a listing, by the way, in alphabetical order. So if anybody wants to find out if something is listed as a kind on the ARC encounter list, they can locate it quickly in a way that you can't in that chaotic mess that the best you can have is a blurry picture on a wall. Unlike Answers in Genesis and other creationists, we are anxious that our readers be able to use and access our information as quickly and intelligently and as usefully as possible. That's the whole point. Source methods on the march. So anyway, let me put up my little ad. We are nearing up a full hour, so I feel it was a satisfying evening. Let me put up our advert for Rocks Were There Volume 1. Wait for my little... There we go. And do my little ye old share screen again. And away we... And off we go. Volume 1 is large, and Volume 2 will be large. I am pleased to say that I've gotten more than one shout out about the book from various venues, including Dapper Dino's videos and Dan Stern Cardinale's stuff and Vice Rhino. So we have a bit of a reputation floating around there with Jackson and I book that it's a go-to resource, meticulously researched and documented, both for the technical science literature that the creationists leave out and a compendium of the creationist literature, because all of this stuff has a long track record. And so the current spin that's given often belies the fact that there has been previous spin. And I, being an old person, am aware of things going way back before Jackson was born, for the creationism of the 60s and 70s, to where you can see the evolution or devolution of the creationist doctrines over time. And there's going to be lots of fun stuff that's coming up on all the topics that are showing how they're modifying or morphing their positions, including in the ARC encounter, where several of the examples of kinds are ones that would have been rejected as heretical, like the short-necked giraffes in the Dwayne Gish era. So don't ever let a creationist tell you they don't believe in evolution. They only believe in evolution within their creationist evolution as it mutates over time and cleans up their dirty linen and simply ignores the stupid views that they had previous. That's how pseudosciences run. So we got a pretty good time frame out of the way there. Everybody stays super duper careful because we are again going into perilous times. It's still unclear the extent to which the Supreme Court is ever going to be weighing in on this just patently fascist, unconstitutional approach of like the idea that the president can just decree that there's unrest in a state and unilaterally call up the National Guard and bring it in, or federal troops, which is even more like King George III, for non-existent troubles. And it's entirely possible that Donald Trump actually thinks that there's some wild riot going on in Portland because he's delusional. And the ideologues like Steve Miller and others who will have no incentive whatsoever to apprise him of any of the facts, and sycophantic suck-ups like Vice President Vance will never do anything to buck the God King Emperor either. So it's going to be a dicey time. Flu COVID's even, so mask up when you go into stores. My niece, who has some health considerations and interacts with, her grandchild and all that, is often brings a mask with her to be on the careful side and all that. But yeah, we've got viruses are still busy little beavers. I'm in a state, Washington, that along with California and Oregon and Hawaii are basically going to go F you to the crazy train RFK, FDA, and their stupid recommendations. We're just not going to pay any attention to them. And there's going to be an awful lot of the nation that will simply ignore them. So they'll put regulations out, and there may come a time when there'll be instances of where the ideologues are wanting to say, no, you can't use this, when science and actual medicine is saying, oh, we need to. And you're going to have things that is going to be the equivalent maybe of like prohibition times, but instead of smuggling in alcohol across the Canadian border or in from Mexico, we'll be bringing in forbidden medicines and the like, or doing things under the rug, or certifying things independently of the FDA. And this is going to be messy, very messy. But when you give the keys to the cars to crazy people, they're going to drive you off the cliff, kids. And I don't want to be strapped in the back seat when that happens. So thank you. We're trying to stand by the wayside and watch as you run off and keep ourselves in more stable position. So everybody be concerned on, we're getting into hurricane season. There's a whole bunch of other serious issues that could be coming on, and keep your powder dry and your debt load down, and hold because it's going to be a bumpy ride ahead. We will see you all next week, and stay safe. Watch out for the laser wielding